Defense News. It's proudly sponsored by Navy Federal Credit Union. If you're a member of our nation's armed forces, the Department of Defense, or if your family is, we'd be proud to serve you too.
On this episode of Defense News Weekly, a conversation with the ranking member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Mark Takano. In the wake of deep cuts to the VA workforce, how are Democrats pushing back? And what impacts do they think the new administration will have on the veterans community? Takano gives his thoughts on those topics and more. Coming to you from Capitol Hill with the latest in news and analysis from the Pentagon to the platoon, this is Defense News Weekly.
I'm here today with Representative Mark Takano, who's the ranking member of the House Veterans Affairs Committee. Thank you for sitting down with us.
Welcome to my office, Leo. Whenever someone like you shows up, my desk gets clean. So
I appreciate that. Listen, I wanted to talk to you, sort of do a heat check on where we are with VA policy and with the Department of Veterans Affairs right now. We've seen a lot of changes, a lot of reforms, the VA Secretary would say, going on at VA. I know you've been very concerned with a lot of things that have happened. So we've got staff cuts, we've got contract cuts, we've got a bunch of policy changes. Let's start with the federal employee workforce there and the staff cuts that you've heard about and that we've gotten some details of, but I don't think you've even gotten full details of what these cuts are.
no, it's very opaque. We do know that 2,400 people that were cut from VA in February, we know about that. We've surveyed people, we've asked people if you have been fired from VA, let us know. And we had, 100 or so people, 150 people kind of respond to our survey, including the veteran employee. So over a third of employees at VA, like the entire federal workforce, tend to be veterans. And this particular individual who was from Florida was one of the people who responded to our survey. He happened to be somebody who worked in the Office of Personnel in a very specific role. He was part of the personnel team that recruited individuals with tech backgrounds, people who manage systems, manage relationships like with Oracle, the EHR, the electronic health record contractor. It's a very complicated system, and you need people who work for VA to help manage the relationships with these contractors. He was somebody that was fired. He was a veteran. He was just, I think, 39 days short of making his probationary sort of,
then he wouldn't have fallen into that cloud.
What we know about the first 2,400 is that these were probationary employees. A probationary employee is someone who's worked less than 2 years or less than a year, and they have less rights. And Elon Musk and Doge, the entities that were looking to find cuts that could be made quickly, look to the probationary employees as the easiest, lowest hanging fruit to cut from their jobs. And I don't think, I'm clear that they didn't have really a plan or a study of who to cut. They were just looking to cut, period. And they weren't looking at the consequence to the veterans, whether it was their health care, whether it was the claims processing, whether it was the people who help staff the suicide hotline to basically get veterans who are in emergency mental health situations, who call up the 988 number, that they cut critical staffing for the hotlines. So it wasn't a well-considered cut. And then I'm horrified to learn that the night before, or the night of actually, the president's address to the joint session of Congress, that there was a memo leaked that 83,000, the Veterans Affairs Department would be also cut. They wanted to take it back to pre-2019 levels, which is pre-COVID, pre-PACT Act. Why am I emphasizing pre-COVID and pre-PACT Act? Well, the PACT Act, which was signed into law in 2022, made 3.5 million veterans eligible for health care at VA. Those 3.5 million veterans could also be presumably made eligible for disability benefits. They have to go through a vetting process. They have to file claims, have those claims processed.
So we're talking about just a massive workload difference from what 2019
A massive workload difference in terms of healthcare providers being hired, in terms of claims processors. That was one of the things that Secretary McDonough was very concerned about when we were passing the PACT Act, was making sure he had the capacity to increase capacity and to ramp up hiring. And that explains why we had tens of thousands of more employees at VA after Donald Trump left office than when he started again. So 2019, they're saying, that's the beginning of Donald Trump's time. Actually, that's the middle of his term. He was elected in 2016, took office 2017. So 2 years in, he's saying, well, we this is an example of massive, bloat at VA. No. VA approved 1.2, I'll say 1.2 million claims, approved claims. I think over 2 million have been processed since the law was signed in 2022. That's a remarkable level of efficiency and effectiveness of government. And I know for a fact that veterans have had their lives changed by the PACT Act. It meant that many veterans got to 100% disability. They increased their percentage overall. We've gotten veterans off the street because that $4,000 a month tax-free check means that they have enough money to get a place to live. So on a number of fronts, what I see happening with these very politically driven cuts, first the 2,400 and then the 83,000 they want to do by August, is a betrayal of the PACT Act, is a betrayal of it.
When we come back, how is the Trump administration deciding which jobs to cut? Takano offers insights.
So the 83,000, they have said they're going to talk to Congress about that. They're going to look for ways to pull back, and there's going to be some discussion. But based on what you've seen with those probationary employees, those first 2,400, and the lack of information you've gotten about who they are and just how that was, do you have faith that this administration is going to really work with you and sort of think through all the steps of what this might do if they cut that much?
I don't think that they're thinking about veterans first. They're not asking the question, what is good for our veterans? They're looking to what is going to look good for them and the politics that they're playing. They want to hold up some sort of pelt. Look, we cut this many jobs today. Look, we're saving you all this money. But caring for our veterans really shouldn't be rooted in how much money we're saving the taxpayer. The taxpayer does not begrudge that we are taking care of veterans whose bodies have been mangled by war, or who are suffering from PTSD, or who need extra mental health care, and we're able to get them quick health care by mental health care by the fact they just call up a 988 number, press 1, and are connected to a counselor who will get them care and don't have to worry about the bill. This is going to take staffing. This is going to take spending of money, and the taxpayer doesn't begrudge that. And this really should not be DOGE should not be. The DOGE mentality should not be what's driving policy at VA.
So what VA officials have said, what Secretary Collins has said, is that yes, there's a lot of resources. Yes, we're still going to try and do all these things, but we can be more efficient with this money. We can be more efficient with our staff. Is that an unfair place to start from?
Totally. Well, I don't mind these questions about being more efficient and more effective, but I don't think this first 2,400 probationary employees, it was probationary employees because they were the easiest to fire. And they were just firing them willy-nilly. I don't see any evidence that they did a study. I mean, Mr. Billionaire Elon Musk and his Doge folks, I mean, they're not following the kinds of practices that are done in corporate America, where if a corporation needs to downsize its workforce, they're going to spend months studying that. They're going to be surgical about where they cut. They don't want to harm the company's mission. And they're not going to do it in a way that puts undue hardship on those employees. They're not going to say, oh, we're going to fire you because we're going to claim that why we're firing you is because of your performance, so that you don't get any unemployment insurance. That's what happened to these probationary employees. They were told they were being fired because of their performance, when in fact we know that these employees were fired just because they were easy to fire. And I had, Tracy Therrett, who's, I forget her title, but she works in human services, personnel services at VA, had her before the committee. She thought she was going to testify in a bill that ironically the Republican bill that would have made it easier to fire people at VA. She wasn't expecting me to have noticed that she was the one that signed all the memos that fired the people. And I asked her, I said, Ms. Therrett, did you actually, what she said in the memo, she said, you're being dismissed because your performance.
Well, they said there was a cause.
There was a cause. It was your poor performance, or it's a performance-related firing, in so many words. And I said, did you make sure that everyone who got sent that memo, that you checked their personal files and actually their performance reviews indicated that this was the reason? And she wasn't able to answer that question. And the answer was no, that they hadn't done that. It was a very rushed process. Their main impetus wasn't to look out for the veteran. Their main purpose was to fire as many people as easily as they could, and the probationary employees were that. They're gonna attempt to go after what's called a reduction in force, and the reduction in force is an analysis of like saying that we have we don't have enough money, or we're cutting this or that, and they can reduce the force. That's a whole process they have to go through. I would expect that the secretary would be upfront and explain all of this to us. I have low expectations that will happen. They've been very opaque so far. We've asked plenty of questions, sent plenty of communication to the secretary about these firings. So we've had, as I said, people that were involved in helping veterans get connected to emergency health care. That whole critical support people who support the counselors on the telephone call for these veterans calling on the hotline, they were cut. The people they have a second person who listens on the line to be able to communicate to the first responders in case we need to get a first responder to that veteran, wherever that veteran is calling. Those are the people that got cut. The Doge people were looking at lists very superficially. They cut people who they thought, that wouldn't be noticed, but they weren't thinking about the veteran.
So you mentioned the hearing, that the legislative hearing where we brought up these issues with the VA officials. I know you've expressed some frustration that there haven't been more oversight hearings, that we haven't seen the Republican side sort of launch into some of these. I know that the Senate Democrats, the Democrats on the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee just announced that they're going to be holding some shadow hearings to try and hit some of these issues. You're in the minority right now. What can you do to highlight these issues, to put up some opposition to the things that you think are wrong? I mean, beyond just
Well, I think we can do some of. I think the Senate is doing a great thing by doing a shadow hearing. I think we'll be definitely watching what they're doing, and we'll supplement on our side a similar shadow hearings where we call our own witnesses and we provide to the public, raise the issues of how we hold, this department, the secretary accountable. We can also send letters, request information. We can do Freedom of Information Act types of letters to get certain information. They're working for the public. They're working for the taxpayer. There are laws in place that allow us to get information. I can request information directly from certain individuals, both in and out of government. If they refuse to answer, I can raise the level of concern by asking the chairman to issue a subpoena. Let's have a vote on a subpoena.
When we come back, our financial expert is back with her latest tips. Don't go away. On this edition of Money Minute, Jeanette Mack from Navy Federal Credit Union is back with her latest advice for financial wellness.
If you're talking savings, you've got to talk CDs or certificates of deposit. They're one of the best and most popular ways to make guaranteed returns at a higher rate than regular savings accounts. CDs work well in a savings plan because they not only offer compound interest, but also because they come in a wide array of term lengths. Usually, the longer the term, the higher the interest rate, and you don't need a huge sum of money to open one either. Some CDs have a minimum deposit of just $50. The trick is knowing how long you can go without those funds, since they'll be locked in for the duration of the CD's term, anywhere from a year to up to 10 years or more. Once you become familiar with CDs, the pro move is to open CDs with varying terms, and when one matures, you roll the money into the CD with the longest term to really compound that interest. That's called CD laddering, and it's a great way to save for your emergency fund or even retirement. Talk to a financial institution you trust about your savings goals and figure out which CD works best for your needs and timing. Above all, put CDs in your financial plan. They work hard for your hard-earned money.
To get more coverage of military and defense topics, grab your NVGs and set your sights on militarytimes.com and defensenews.com. And to be the most up-to-date sailor in the submarine, sign up for our early bird brief, compiled each morning bringing you the most recent headlines. And if social media is where you collect open source intelligence, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and X. And for you Gen Z troops, we're on TikTok, so go find us there as well. When we come back, the conclusion of our Capitol Hill conversation with Representative Mark Takano. Don't miss it.
What can you do right now? Do you think there are areas of easy compromise that you can work with Republicans on? And then are there areas that you think that they'll start to come around on where they'll see maybe this 80,000 cut where they will want to have more information and they'll join you in pushing for more?
Well, look, there are some Republicans that there was maybe, I think, 34 Republicans that voted for the PACT Act initially in 2022.
Yeah.
But the Republican leadership opposed it, even when it passed the Senate by a huge amount. We had to go through a couple times. I don't want to go through the whole story, but this Speaker of the House voted against the PACT Act. And Chairman Bost voted against it initially. We changed it significantly. He had an excuse to then vote for it. But they've never really liked the way we've funded the PACT Act. It's very costly. And we called it the cost of war. And it is, it's like, the initial estimates by the CBO were upwards of $700 billion, close to $750 billion that was needed to be taking care of all this. So the entire Republican Party, my colleagues, have never liked being on the hook for that much money. My position and the position of the Democrats has always been, hey, toxic exposure is the cost of war. It's no different than paying for someone's helmet. someone's flak jacket when they're in the heat of battle. The heat of battle just sort of shows up 5, 10, 15 years later when all these different, illnesses start to show up because you were exposed to Agent Orange, you were exposed to blasts, you were exposed to burn pits, and you need some peace of mind for you and your family that you're going to get benefits and you're going to get health care. How do I know? What's the evidence for this? This latest continuing resolution that we had a battle over zeroed out the advanced appropriations by some like $24-25 billion. Now, for your listeners, and the VA is one of the few places where we approve how much money a year before. This is the only thing. This is how much political weight there is behind taking care of our veterans. Mm-hmm. But as evidence, and they zeroed it out. They said, the appropriations for the next fiscal year got zero in it. And they said Democrats are hyperventilating. They're exaggerating.
Well, they said that they're going to come back and they're going to talk about that money when it comes to that part. But I know the Toxic Exposure Fund was designed to be guaranteed money that didn't have to do that. Now that they've made that move, do you think you're going to be able to convince them? Do you think this is just going to be more of the same fight?
I think I'm going to be very successful at making it too hot for them to handle.
Okay.
They're deluding themselves if they think that the American people are going to want to see the Hunger Games created between veterans and school lunches. Veterans, we created the toxic. So we have spending that we do on our defense, and we have spending that we don't do on defense. They're two big categories. VA, oddly enough, is in the category of non-defense spending. And so we knew that toxic exposure could cost up to $750 billion. And if you're committed to making sure we take care of the veteran, you would say, look, we don't want to make the veterans who are suffering from toxic exposure compete with all of the other domestic priorities or compete against our military, right? But we've got to make this commitment to them. So we created a special fund called the Toxic Exposure Fund. Republicans never liked it.
And that just essentially took everything out of the budget debate. That was a separate
That's
fund.
right.
So what it
just said, look, it made it politically possible for us to say this is how we're going to fund it. They've zeroed that out for next year. I think that is a huge indication of where they want to go. And they're gonna turn it into a debate later on. Well, we got to pay for it some other way. We can't. This is an addition. I'm saying, no. You just want to undermine the PACT Act. You want to renege on it. They won't cop to it, but that's what they're up to.
All right. Well, Congressman, you got some votes coming up, so I appreciate all the time here, and I'll be talking to you about this in the months to come.
Thank you.
Well, that's all we have time for in this episode. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.